Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of HR Heretics. I am so excited to have my friend Anna Binder on the show today. Nolan is traveling, so it's just us gals, which is also exciting. Not that we don't love Nolan, but Anna is great, everyone. I've been trying to get her on here, maybe for a year, Anna, and finally made it work. She's one of the busiest people ever. And I think we've known each other since, I think it was 2014 we met around that era. So I guess over the 10-year threshold now, which is a milestone. We should go out and celebrate that. But Anna has been in the industry for over 25 years. I mean, she was the head of people at MuleSoft, like in their heyday of growth. She's a board member, a venture advisor, board member for Culture Amp, which is an incredible company, and has been the head of people over at Asana. And I did a triple take. It was like almost 9 years, which is unheard of, which I want to get into. But it's an incredible run at Asana, which is a great company. So welcome to the show, Anna. Excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Full disclosure, I'm like looking up my own LinkedIn right now because you just threw out years and numbers where I'm like, when was that?
It's kind of like having kids. We like forget about the whole experience after it's over. Yeah, I do that too sometimes with LinkedIn. We have a lot to cover today. So Anna, you are a board member of Culture Amp, where we had Didier on the show. I don't know if you heard that episode, but I think it was about 4 months ago. He's incredible. That is a great company. I think if you're in the industry, you know it, you use it most likely. How did that come about, that role?
Well, a few years before I even met Didier, I had sort of set a goal for myself to join a for-profit business board. And I spoke to my boss, Dustin Moskowitz, about it at Asana, talked about what the pros and cons might be, what the commit is. And, I both wanted his advice and his support and just sort of liked his co-creation on what might make sense. And we were definitely in violent agreement that it would be good for me as an executive. And in fact, I think it's really great for any executive to sit on the board. In an operating role, you're so in the weeds. You're so trying to achieve your goals. Even an executive of a public company, you're in it. And serving on a board really helps give you perspective. And so I thought that might be the case. So I set a goal and I didn't have any timeline. It's not like a job, right? And it has to be the right thing because it is a many, many, many year commitment. So I started to tell people. I did things like, I met with women, particularly who were focused on trying to place other women on boards. I talked to my own board members, but then I just sort of waited and let it unfold. And it was actually a great story because Didier reached out to me. He was looking to hire a chief people officer and he felt stuck and he wanted some advice. I'm sure this happens to you all the time, right? Like people call you and say, hey, how should I think about my search? Thinly veiled, not so thinly veiled attempt to recruit you, but that was the premise. And we were a customer of Culture Amp. I was a long admirer of the philosophy and the point of view. And so, of course, I took the call. And I've been at Asana now. It feels like, a little while, close to 10 years. And I've been really clear for a long time that this is it. I am staying here. Once I leave here, I'm going to be done with operating roles. So it's really easy to say no, right? I know it's really easy to say no to operating roles. But we were talking and the conversation evolved towards how I use the product as a customer. And I'm in that product every single day. It's a product I couldn't do my job without, whether it is understanding performance, engagement, now analytics. Before I meet with any leader in the company, I look in Culture Amp and see what's going on with their organization. And so this was during the pandemic and we were talking and we were just about to wrap it up. And I said to myself, I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And so I took a deep breath and I said, listen, buddy, I love your company. I love your product. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So if you're ever looking for an independent board member, I would be really honored if you'd consider me. And I'll never forget it because I put my Zoom on mute so that I would stop talking because I was so nervous. I was going to like keep babbling and just like basically talk him out of considering me. And he was
There's
so
one silver lining of Zoom, right? You can
totally
shut yourself up in the moment.
Boom. And he was great. He was like, Anna, you beat me to it. I am actually looking for an independent board member and I'd love to engage in the conversation. So like it just sort of falls into the category of like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I took that one and I'm like, I feel like I hit the jackpot.
You know what's so important about what you just said? We've talked about this on the show a lot, Anna, and I get this question all the time. How do I do this? How do I get here? It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a board member or something else. You take the fucking call. I have people call me and they're like, can I get your advice or help? Yeah, sure. They might be trying to get something free. Yes, take the call because look at what that was. That was not a board member call at all. And most of the advising and even current clients I have are not because they were calls where I sought out to do those things.
No, 100%. When I think about the big moments in my career, I can like root them back to relationships I built where like I didn't have anything to gain. I didn't have any, I just took the call. It's part of being a member of the community. And, it's really interesting. And I'll try to say this carefully. And if I screw it up, you'll edit me. But one of the things that I think might be a generational difference in people coming up now, and I've literally gotten the question from people that I work with, like, well, why, what are you going to get out of that call? And how do you do that calculus? And, you only have so many hours in the day. And like, well, what are you going to, and I don't, it blows my mind, right? Like you're paying things forward in some which way. And if you can participate, you always get something out of the call. You always learn something.
Could not agree more. And so let me just dig into being a board member a little bit because it doesn't matter if you're a people leader or any business leader. Once you get it, right, you're kind of like, oh, great. Oh, shit. Now what? Like, what do I do differently? How does this work? And to your point, you can't just like quit the board seat. It's not like an at will. So, it is, but it's not like you could just decide you don't want to do it again one day. So what was different? How did you get good at it? How do you show up at these meetings or prepare? How do you interact with fellow members? Like, what's the secret behind the sauce on that?
I'll be honest with you. So the other thing that's strange about, there's so many things that are different about serving on a board than operating. You really, you really only engage deeply a few times a year, right? Like there's 4 board meetings a year. There's 4 comp committee meetings. There's tons of in between, but like the big moments they're not that many. So I probably for the first year, I really connected with my own deep and loud imposter syndrome because everybody, and of course I hadn't met any of these people who were all in Zoom. They had all been on a board together for a long time. They all knew what they were doing. Like bankers, CEOs, and founders and like, who the hell am I? So
yeah, you're like, you all have been boarding together forever. And
I'll walk through a few different things that I do to do the work and prepare. First of all, I'm a very active operational leader. That is code for I get in the weeds and probably too much in the weeds, according to some of the people that work for me. Like I care about the details. I sweat them. And so I have a little sticky pad in my board notebook that says, reminder, you're not an operator here. Right. And it's a silly thing, but I look at it through each meeting, right? Like you're not an operator. Another thing is that board meetings at Culture Amp and every other kind of tech company, right? Like you get a board deck, right? And if it's, sometimes it's really well put together and sometimes it's not so well put together and it's, it's more slides than you know what to do with. And I don't know how else to say it, but you got to prepare, right? It takes half a day to prepare for a 2 or 3 hour board meeting. And, I print the thing out, I read it, I take notes, I ask myself questions, like I do all these things. Then I actually try to meet with a couple other board meeting members before the meeting that have very different lenses than I do and ask them what they see. because it's just like, again, different people have different perspectives, and some people are coming at it with expertise around funnel metrics or financial metrics. And not only do I want to understand their perspective, but I want to learn.
So connecting with that was on my list because that can be easily missed. I'm on the board, I have a role, I show up. My assumption is it's kind of like when you're an operator, you actually want to build relationships with your fellow board members and the CEO of the company. So how does that compare? Do you put the same amount of effort into doing that? How often do you meet with these board members? What's it like?
That's a good question. So I meet with a CEO every couple of weeks, depending on the topic, right? So we've been deep in rebuilding the executive team, and I've been, I chair the comp committee, so I'm very involved in that to riff on different elements of that. The other component of it is is there any job more lonely than being a CEO? And so I think as an independent member of the board, I'm there to help try to make it just one click less lonely. There's one other independent on the board. Her name is Rolly Sexina. She is incredible, right? Like we compare notes on what we're seeing. We challenge each other. She's actually our lead independent. And over the last few years, when there's been a couple times where I haven't looked at my little sticky note and said, you're not an operator, and I've said something that maybe was too operatey, she has called me right up, like right after the meeting, and said, hey, I don't think that was the right thing to say, and here's why. And it's been incredible. Like, I feel like she's got my back 100%. And we're so aligned on the North Star of the goal of helping make this company successful. So those relationships are critical.
Yes. And you said something that I think our audience, and selfishly me, frankly, as someone who probably wants to be on a board one day, I don't know, but what was that? Do you have an example of something you said that was operating and broke the Post-it rule? And what's the right thing to say? You do what I mean? What would she call you and say, that was a really great?
Well, I'll connect this to something. So the right thing to say is always a question. How are you thinking about X? How are you thinking about Y? What kind of impact might this have? What are the opportunity costs of this one? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's hard for me to read you. Are you 10 out of 10 concerned, or are you just casually mentioning this? Always, the right thing to say is a question. It's beautiful. It's very, very simple. Now, I'll connect it to, there's another board member, an investor, a guy named Nick Croker. He's based in Australia, and he's has so much pattern matching, right? Because he's been on the board, he's been on so many boards. He's very smart. He's very fast. And one of the things that he taught me is, and it's not the best language, but it's really clear. He's like, Anna, every quarter, every board meeting, I've only got 1 or 2 bullets. I've only got 1 or 2 things that I should say that really, really matter. He's like, think about it. Didier has 8 board members. If they all have 2 bullets, that's 16 things, right? That is a lot. He's like, so unless it's really compelling, I try to stick it, to one. And I remember, I'll never forget, we met for coffee in San Francisco before a board meeting. He's like, so what's your bullet? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And it just became, so now I'm constantly thinking, what's my bullet?
Yeah. Less is more. And perhaps the bullet is a question.
Yes. The bullet is always a question, but you only get really land that one. It harkens back to, at Asana, this is a company filled with smart, thoughtful introverts. And Prashant Pandey, who's our head of engineering, is constantly asking himself, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? And does it need to be said by me? Those are questions that I would have never asked myself before Asana. I'd just be like, of course, this thing popped into my head and I'm going to say it. So it's just I've become a more thoughtful leader.
That's awesome. That's really smart. Thank you for sharing that around boards. I mean, it's just myself, I'm curious too, like what happens, like unpacking that a little bit more than just the mechanics.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
Shifting a little bit now, because this story is incredible, and I think everyone's getting a lot of value, is your experience and your fun at building MuleSoft. Like back in the heyday, I'm talking like, what year was that? That was...
So I joined MuleSoft in 2014, which is actually when I think you and I talked. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So we talked, you were at MuleSoft building. I was at GitHub building. Those were two incredibly intense time periods for both of those companies. Tell us about your experience there. Let's dig into that a little bit.
So MuleSoft, needs no introduction. An incredible company, fantastic technology, amazing go-to-market. Like went public, then purchased by Salesforce. Just really just a pure successful run. The CEO cared a lot about talent. He cared a lot about how talent came into the organization. He was, and he put his money where his mouth is, right? Like he didn't just give lip service to it. He was on almost every interview panel, right? Like he really walked the walk. It didn't take long for the both of us to realize that we really didn't agree on priorities and philosophies around talent. And, quite frankly, we're all grown-ups. And at the end of the day, if you've got an executive that disagrees with the CEO, guess who wins, right? And it was both one of the hardest things. So I should just rewind and be really clear. I was unceremoniously invited to exit that company. I was invited to leave. I think we call that getting fired. And it was simultaneously one of the toughest things I've been through professionally. And it happened to change my life for the better in so many ways.
Yeah. So tell me, because I think it's so interesting, Anna, because I venture to believe most of the people that are listening to this or whatnot have had an experience somewhat similar. I certainly have. And when you're going through it, you feel like it's the worst thing in the world. Like, oh, why I'm failing or this or that. Like, let's talk about the moments leading up to how you got to the conclusion that you just weren't going to see eye to eye. Like, what were those weeks or months or days looking like and feeling like?
Yeah, I think that the human brain has an incredible capability of shutting out the worst feelings and memories. So I have to really connect with it. So I don't mean to sound callous, but I connect with it a little bit intellectually. But I remember feeling really disappointed. I was horrified that I got myself into this situation. Before then, I had had like really like wonderful job experiences and in a hyper growth, intense environment like that. Like it's so intense and so nonstop. You barely have a moment to breathe. And, I also like I had a new family and it was just like, it was overwhelming. So I remember feeling disappointed. Remember thinking, how did I let this happen? Like I felt I felt a lot of agency and a lot of responsibility. If I'm honest, I had some shame around not advocating for myself more. There's some structural things about how that executive team worked that I just felt like were discounting of women and working mothers in particular. And it was like, at one point I knew it was going to end and it was just a matter of like, how is it going to end? When I coach managers here at Asana about terminating folks, I kind of have a rule of thumb, like in the moment, anyone is going to be shocked, right? Because it's like a shocking thing to be fired. But really what can't be true, they can't be deeply surprised. When they go home that night and go to bed and like think about it, they better not be surprised. And I think that was true of getting fired at MuleSoft, right? Like I was shocked in the moment, but like I knew it was coming.
It's so interesting. Like, thank you for being so open about this because a lot of folks aren't. And I think especially, you tell me what you think, but in my experience, especially 10, 12 years ago, it was like, oh my God. And now that I'm 15, 16 years in venture, it's like more common than not. Do you know what I mean? And like, cause I had a similar experience and I was like, I joined this company. The whole game changed very unexpectedly, investigation change, CEO change. I mean, the whole thing was like thrown up and then a totally different ball game. And it wasn't a good ball game for me. Like it just values matching style. And I was young. I think I was, 32 years old, something like that. Kind of my first real thing in venture. And you're right. These high pressure, high, growth situations, you got to stick to who you are because you can get lost very easily. And, for others who've been through this, and then you start to self-doubt, you're like, why can't I fix this? Shame, all these things. And the biggest thing I coach people on now is like, look, the most of the reason these C-level execs or what have you don't work out isn't because of their technical or functional skill sets. It's usually because of a cultural mismatch, a values mismatch, right? Disagreement on the role or what that looks like. And that is okay.
It's totally, and again, massively successful company, just not the right place for me. And from the company's perspective, I was not the right thing for them. But it was, I imagine in reflecting on the learnings, right? Like immediately I just had to like take a deep breath. But one of the things I did really quickly is I told people what had happened. I named the awkward. I gave it less power. Silicon Valley is tiny. So, Silicon Valley, the concept. And so I was like, I'm not going to make up stories. I'm going to honor the decision and I'm going to own it. And then I put my energy into my job search, right? Like I actually love interviewing. In an interview, you get to learn about a new business, a new executive team, a new market. And I'm just a curious person about business. And so I saw it as a real benefit. And then I will say, like, I feel like my life got changed because two things happened. First of all, as I was exiting, you're kind of like still there, but you're really totally irrelevant. Like you have like no voice, you have like nothing. But they still want you around so that it looks nice. And I'll never forget it. It was in December, I think it was December 2015. And I was like, well, I don't have much to do. So I spotted a freckle on my leg and I was like, that looks a little weird. You sit down to pee many times a day. And so it's a place you see. And I was like, I'm going to do the responsible thing. I'm going to go check it out. Well, it turned out it was a very fast growing melanoma that I had to have surgery for really quickly. And I'm not sure that I would have made that a priority in a different chapter. So that changed my life. And then the other thing that changed my life, and this truly changed my life, is Matt Kohler, who had been an old friend and an old associate from Benchmark, called me. And I took the call again because I was, just kind of on the beach. Yeah. And he said, Anna, I have a few opportunities that I want to talk to you about. And I was like, great timing. Let's talk. Like I'm going to be out of a job in 10 minutes. And he started with Asana and like, he's like, he talked about the platform. He talked about reducing work about work. He talked about the long term and the mission and how special Dustin was. He talked about how Asana had already at 100 people hired its first head of diversity and inclusion. And I was like, this all sounds amazing. 100 people is a little, you don't need me. Like that's too early, but that's interesting. What else do you have? And he's like, well, why don't you go talk to Dustin and then we'll talk about the other opportunities that I don't really have and I just made up. So it's great. It's great. Matt Kohler is like the best salesperson that I've ever worked with. And then I met Dustin and, 15 conversations later, here I am.
Oh my gosh. And so almost 9 years with Asana. I think this puts you maybe at the top percentile of executive tenures. Maybe the top. I don't know. Probably not the top. But did you know that when you were talking with Dustin? Like, how did you seek that out? Like, what did you do during that interview process that others can learn to make sure that you didn't get there and 68 days in go, oh shit, what did I do?
Well, we definitely took our time. Like when I say I interviewed at Asana 15 times. Like I entered that building 15 times as part of the interview process.
Over what time period? Do you remember?
I think it started in January and so the interview process started in January and my job started in May. So yeah, like 4 solid months. Yeah. And each time probably half those times I met with Justin and, but I met 25 people. It was a thorough job.
And did you drive that or did Asana drive that?
Both. I mean, I was, what do you say? Twice bitten, once wet. I don't know what that phrase is, but I was very careful and they were very careful. Like this is a company that had started with values and culture. And now that like even the concept to them of like, oh, we're going to hand these reins over to somebody to sort of orchestrate that was wobbly and it wasn't well broadly supported internally. Right. So they were incredibly, incredibly careful. But there's so many things that I loved about those first few conversations. First of all, I was in the kitchen with my little family, my husband and my stepdaughter. And my husband's like, well, what are you doing today? And I was like, oh, I'm meeting the CEO of a company called Asana. Or, I couldn't even say it right. And he's like, Asana? And my husband he was a CEO of a broker dealer at the time. And he had like 20 employees all over the world. And he's like, it's open on my screen. I use it every day to run my company. And so that was, and so then I went trot into my first interview and Dustin and I probably spent a couple hours that first day, just really talking about philosophy, building company philosophy and with a wide ranging conversation covering lots of different things. Very interesting. And, I'll never forget what happened. Like later that night, I got an email from him. He's a writer. Like he has a phrase that writing is thinking. And he wrote me a long email, reflecting on our conversation and saying, hey, I'm so excited that we aligned on these things. And you gave me a lot to think about on these things. And I just want to remind you, I think you're really wrong about this thing, and it was just so thoughtful and well written. I still remember I showed it to my husband and he grasshoppered me, he patted me on the head and said, little grasshopper, you can go interview for as many other jobs as you want, but you're going to go end up working for that guy. And he was right.
Oh my gosh. And so, yeah, that's a great story. That is a great story. And you're obviously still working with Dustin there, still here. And you all have gone through so many evolutions. I could just imagine because, one day at these companies is like 4. So I can't imagine how many evolutions you've gone through. How do you keep up the stamina? Like, what's the trick in like getting through them and having the interest to like want to keep tinkering without getting tired?
There were 2 things that really, like in that process, no, 3 things. First of all, one of the recruiters halfway through the process gave me some feedback, and she's like, you seem to be a little bit negative about your MuleSoft story. Is like, what is that about? And I was like, so never mind. Like I loved it that she named it. You know, she said, hey, let's unpack that together. And she was testing to see how I took the feedback and how I engaged and did I get defensive? And because that was just so core to the values of the company of like, let's talk about the tough stuff. And I like that just, instead of giving me hot flashes, it made me love the company so much more, you know, like it was fantastic. So that's number 1. Number 2, this is going to sound like such a silly, banal example, but the offices at the time were on Bryant Street in San Francisco next to the sports basement. And every time I went there and spent many hours there, I went into the bathroom many times. And it was like, you know, software companies are filled with dudes. Like, you know, it was all engineers. So it was all dudes. The women's bathroom was curated and designed by people who were very intentional about the user experience. Like the things that you needed, nicely arranged, clean, like just thoughtful. And that is really how they design the product, right? And to be able to see that in the bathroom was really meaningful to me. Especially, I spent most of my life in very male-dominated enterprise software, you know, MuleSoft, Ironport. You know, I would have never seen a bathroom like that. And it sent a message to the women coming into that building. It was really, really powerful to me.
Well, you said earlier that you like getting into details. Now, if that's not an example of that, I don't know what is. That's a great story.
I notice everything. And then the last thing, I'm a really big believer that your values live in your calendar, right? Like, I don't, you know, whether you make minimum wage or you are a bazillionaire, you know, how you spend your like wild and precious life says everything about your values. And during the interview process, I asked Dustin, I said, I want to understand how you spend your time. And he started talking and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no. I want to see your laptop and I want you to open your Google Calendar.
You did not.
I did. And he looked at me like, what are you, crazy lady? And then he's like, that's a good idea. And he opened it up. And he walked me through it and what it meant. And I think it showed me so many things about the type of CEO he is, the things that he spends time on. And he explained the pros and cons of each. He had family time on there. He had thinking time on there. He had his one-on-ones arranged in a way that gave him room to prepare for each one. Like so I highly, highly recommend that.
That is an incredible hack. And I would venture to say that a lot of CEOs wouldn't even know it was on there, which is a flag in itself. What's this? What's next? What's this?
It's terrifying. That's terrifying.
Well, I wanted to ask you, because I love this topic with you. You have actually a very controversial recruiting philosophy, or maybe controversial to some. And I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a recruiting philosophy. It is like a management and hiring for me personally. I think, you know, some people say like, oh, 90% is showing up. And I think maybe the next 8% is like, know who you are. And I am successful to the extent that I am successful. I'm successful because I know what I'm good at and bad at. I am a leader of thoroughbreds. I am not a developer of people. So everybody that works for me could do my job and probably could do it as well or better than I can. So I'm here to bring the team together and get them excited about the mission and like clear on the goals. But these people run independently and we might riff and co-create, but everybody that works for me at Asana is like truly a thoroughbred. It's kind of incredible. My whole life, I've never had a team like I've been able to develop or to hire here. And yeah, I hope that's terrible to say that I don't.
But why? Like, tell me why you have that. Like, why aren't you a developer of people?
I don't know, because like deep down, I'm like, I wish that I was like a very high functioning individual contributor. Like I like to do the work. I like doing work. And again, this is not the only way. And certainly I'm not advocating that you take my route, because if every executive did that, I think it would be a terrible world. And many of my colleagues at Asana are exactly the opposite, right? Like they thrive and grow and are like incredibly excited about developing people and succession. And it's not where I get my energy.
I love it. I respect it. I mean, we talk a lot about in the show that more important than the answer, so to speak, or the approach is clarity of identity and clarity of who the hell you are.
That is a better way that's a great phrase.
That's great. That's great. That reminds me of when I woke up one day and I was like, I don't really want to lead all these people. I want to be an IC for a while. It was incredibly liberating. It's okay to say it. So that's great. Well, I have one more topic I'd love to kick around with you, Anna, before I let you go. And it's really on the DEI front. Independent of everything that's going on right now, and we're seeing it, we're reading it, we're seeing a lot of changes within companies. I mean, you all at Asana have really been at the forefront. You are considered one of the best in this approach to this and have been extremely committed to it, and would just love to hear kind of how that's evolved, what's gone really well, what'd you do wrong, and maybe just some personal thoughts on what you think's kind of happening in the market right now, the news,
Do we have like another 2 hours?
And maybe wine.
Maybe wine. So look, our work around diversity, inclusion, and belonging is grounded in the same thing today that it was 15 years ago. Diverse teams that operate effectively, where people have a deep sense of belonging and feel safe to speak up and disagree up, down, and across, produce better business outcomes. So the reason that we invest in this is because we believe that it drives better business outcomes. And if our business is successful, we will achieve our mission. That is true today. It was true 10 years ago. It will be true in the future, regardless of who's in the White House or who is not in the White House. That is a fundamental. The next thing I will say, around it, maybe this is just like a little story, like anybody else doing this work, we would invest the dollars, we would set goals, we would track programs. And I'll never forget when, I was, 2 or 3 years in, and we were nowhere. We had we had failed on all different kinds of fronts. And I was almost in tears because we tried so hard. Right. And I remember I was in a one-on-one with Dustin, kind of a little bit demoralized around it. And he pulled up some of the same data I was looking at, but he just zoomed out, and he's like, you're looking at 12 months worth of data. And he's like, we have a mission at Asana that includes helping humanity thrive. He's like, do you think that you can measure helping humanity thrive on a 12-month calendar? You got to zoom out. You can't get tired. Yeah. Set goals and then learn and iterate. But he's like, we can't get discouraged. He's like, we got to keep going. We have to play the long game. So it reset me. It reminded me. And then over the years, again, I think other people have heard me talk about, you can build the right top of funnel. It's just a choice. And last week, I was invited to participate in a training program at the New York Stock Exchange. Turns out the New York Stock Exchange has a program run by this amazing woman her name is Suzanne Brown. And she works to place people from underrepresented backgrounds into their 2,000 New York Stock Exchange companies. And I went to their training program. It was filled hundreds of women, mostly women of color, all on boards or board ready. And, I had a moment because I thought I could have never been in this room. This room wouldn't exist in San Francisco. This is not and these are people who are on boards of auto manufacturing companies and, cleaning supply company, all of these industries and these companies across the company that you and I, like, they just aren't on our radar. And it was just such a reminder to me, like, if you're not seeing what you need to see, you're in the wrong room. Get yourself in the right room. And I think that the same is true of building your pipe. One of the things that I wonder about is employee referral programs, right? And you take all that money and put it into putting yourself in the right room, maybe you'll have a different outcome.
Totally. And I love what Dustin said about the long game. And I think that, presumably he said it years ago, right? Because you've been there a long time. And to have said that years ago was, I think, very, very wise and very different than what we were seeing with a lot of these companies doing kind of window dressing stuff and quotas and measuring the percents every 6 months or 12 months. And that's why you guys are still sticking with it, because.
Well, and it means different things in different chapters of your, there's a time we were growing our headcount 30% year over year. Like, I had a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. I'm not doing that today. But guess what? We can build sponsorship programs to invest and develop the people here. And this is, sometimes my shortcoming is the failure of my imagination, because I have a long tenure here. That means, like, there's 3 other companies I haven't been at during that time. So I've been able to hire people who've brought in their ideas from other companies, from larger companies, and who've advocated. There's a guy named Mike Jordan who works for me, and he's like, we can build a sponsorship program to support these, up and coming people. And I'm like, oh, sponsorship programs, those are for big companies, not like us. Oh my God, was I wrong? It's like one of the most successful programs that we built. Everyone that has run through it comes and finds me and says, this changed my life and it's going to change my career. So I guess let's just ignore the noise. Remind ourselves why we're doing this. We are in the business of business. We want to make our business successful, and we can do that by playing the long game on this work.
It's a nice time to kind of reset and whiteboard it and go back to the first principles versus, grabbing on to all the noise that's out there and the latest thing, so I love that. Anna, this has been amazing.
Can I give a plug for 1 or 2 other things? I may have already talked to you about this, but before the pandemic hit, I was in this little thing called like an HR supper club. And it was 10 heads of HR, chief people officers from different companies at very similar stages of growth and life that Asana was. And we used to have dinner together on a quarterly basis, and we just like go around the room and help each other out. Yes. And then when the pandemic hit, we really got together. There was that crazy month in February where we probably talked every day. We were sharing all of our comms. We were saying, oh, I shut down Singapore. Oh, I shut down Vancouver, and the Google Docs were flowing. And over the next 2 years, we really we met weekly for 2 years. When I look at that group now, my little precious beloved supper club, of the 10 that started, only 2 remain. People have retired. They've moved out of the function. Some got spectacularly fired. Some just said, oh my gosh, I'm done. And I think that that's emblematic of a lot of leaders, kind of our generation that have left the field. And I guess I just want to say in an encouraging voice, I think HR leaders are business leaders that have incredible impact. Yes, it's sometimes tiring, but it is so impactful. I love this work out loud. There are paths to do it. There are amazing communities that you can build. And I just want to encourage people to enter the field, not exit the field.
I always say, it's one of the hardest jobs out there, but those times, those stretches where you get it right and it kind of, everything's clicking together, there's literally no better feeling. and you're just chasing that. You're trying, and it's addicting. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Cool. All right, Anna. Well, thank you so much, my friend. It's good to see you. We will definitely have you back. Friend of the show. Tons of learnings. Thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. This is what this show is all about. So appreciate you.
Thank you. I loved being here.
Okay. See y'all.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.